sometimes a election worker makes a mistake and gives a voter the wrong ballot. Typically what happens is those come back at night with the information. They're not in the blue bin of voted ballots that come out of the tabulator. They're given to us at check-in. They let us know that they're uncounted ballots. So we have categories like uncounted ballots and returned blank ballots. So we send out a stack of blank full-page paper ballots, and those that aren't used are returned in a bag. Likewise, we'll get these few uncounted ballots, typically from a handful of sites. So this is not atypical. What is atypical in this situation is that they did not give it back to us in the correct location at the correct time, so we located them when we were working through provisionals. Since we have already made the totals and it was past the time to add those, I'm bringing them to you for two reasons. Number one, for transparency, because the totals will change if they're accepted. And number two, because on, looks like up to 24 of these, the voter may have been given the wrong ballot. If the voter was given the wrong ballot, they would potentially have voted for contests in which they were not eligible. So the recommendation is for you to authorize me to count those contests for which the voter would be eligible. But that's the reason why I'm bringing them to you. Again, it's not atypical to see these come in that have not read, but the two things that are atypical is one, that they were not located until well after the day after the election, and two, that we do know that there are a good handful that may have been the wrong ballot style. Is that helpful?
I think all the commissioners might have a number of questions.
Okay.
I'll start out. These are the sheets that come out of the machine that we vote on. Is that what you're telling us?
There are both the espresso ballot cards that are printed and full-page ballots.
Okay. How many of those came out of the machine?
I would have to count them. There's a total of 25.
25 came out of the machine?
No, there's a total of 25. I don't have the breakdown of the type because some of them are in sealed bags.
Okay. The ones that came out of the machine, I experienced this one time and it would not read mine. So they voided that one document that I had and gave me another one. I revoted and it read, it didn't count. So is that the normal procedure, or what is the normal procedure?
Yes, that is what the board worker should have done, which is why we call this a board worker error.
Okay. Now, the ones that, what are the other ones? Are those provisional ballots, or are they the actual ballot for that precinct, or what are these other ones that you're talking about?
So again, it could have been one that they printed the wrong ballot style for the individual or for the location, and it didn't read through the machine.
Okay. It didn't read in the machine here?
Didn't read it in the machine there. We didn't read it in the machine here because we didn't locate it until we were going through provisionals, which was past the time where we would have normally worked through those.
Oh. When we're out there, you've got ballot printers also.
In some locations, correct.
In some locations. Was this a ballot printer or was this a ballot that you'd already pre-printed?
It would have been a ballot printer.
Okay. And that pre-printed ballot, what's the process? Once you get that and they vote on it, what happens to that pre-printed ballot next?
They should, if it is not a provisional ballot, if someone has just requested a paper full-page ballot, they print it and they should take it to the tabulation equipment and run it.
Oh, it gets read right away. But they did not do that.
They did, and it didn't read. And instead of issuing a new one, they packed it up as an unvoted ballot that wouldn't read.
Okay. So every one of these could have been corrected as a polling site. It's just now it's to our position to decide whether or not to count them.
That's correct.
Okay. Of these 25, are you able to identify who the voter was?
No.
Okay. That's good. I like that answer. Okay. And we'll go down the line. Mr. Cruz, do you have a question?
Yeah, so how do you know that a voter didn't vote twice if you can't identify the voter?
Okay, because they only check in once.
Okay. So they could, but could they have put a provisional ballot at a different place? Could they have come down here?
No, so
I know. Just keep it. I'll just scream. I'll just be real loud.
no, so the voter would check in, they would have gotten the ballot, and that doesn't once they check in, they're checked in. So they move over, and whether or not the ballot that they get goes in the tabulator, they've already checked in, so they couldn't check in anywhere else.
Okay, so they couldn't have been sent an advance ballot either. I just want to make sure that they're not voting twice.
So people could be sent an advance ballot and show up to vote, but if they are sent an advance ballot and then show up to vote, they're checked in provisionally. Yeah.
Okay.
And we've got some of those categories for you as well.
Okay.
Commissioner Howe.
Want me to use the microphone?
Sure, if you'd like.
Sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
Let's make sure I can be heard. So when Commissioner Dennis described the situation, he actually had an unreadable ballot, but it was for the correct ballot. You had the correct ballot, just it wasn't unreadable for some reason. And you mentioned a minute ago these ballots might have to be partially counted. How do you know how to partially count them if you don't know what precinct or what was the proper ballot for these particular voters?
So what we would ask you to consider is if the ballot that the voter got at the polling location, which we have because they're separated by polling location, was a ballot for that polling location, then we would assume that that was the correct ballot. If the ballot was not a ballot for that polling location, then it would not have been the correct ballot, and we would intend for you to look at counting the contests for which the voter would have been eligible to vote. So things like the statewide contests.
One more question.
Sure.
Okay, so let me take the microphone. It's a long story. I'm sorry. And you know this story. One of the poll workers, a gentleman came in to vote, and he was told that he had already received the mail ballot, which he did not know. He was on the permanent disabled list, and he was sent the ballot, but he never received it. So he showed up at poll site to vote, and they checked him in. They said, we've already sent you a ballot, which he never received. But that's another story. So they went ahead and did the ballot on demand printer, printed him a ballot, and they printed the wrong ballot. He never tried to put that into a scanner, a DS200, because he had to vote provisional. But you're telling me that if he had tried to, if he would have been allowed to vote a normal process at that particular moment, that tabulator would not have accepted that ballot because it wasn't expecting a ballot out of the wrong part of the county. It would have rejected it at that moment, right? He should have received a Riverside ballot. He ended up receiving a City of Wichita ballot for a different for a different part of the county. So had they tried to scan that in to that tabulator, he would have rejected it because it wasn't expecting something outside of a certain number of ballot styles.
On election day, that is correct.
On election day.
Yes.
So, just as a matter of training, I think that we have an opportunity to make sure that when we do ballot on demand ballots, I suspect most of this is that these are fairly new to Sedgwick County. The I'll just tell you this, the RI-07 looks just like 107. And that's exactly what happened. So they printed 107 when they should have printed RI-07, and it's completely different people on those ballots. So they were able to print the wrong ballot. But that would have caused this very same problem had they tried to scan that in. In his case, he was doing provisional, so we got caught. And he called me. But I can see how this would happen. So we have a significant opportunity for training to make sure you don't print the wrong ballot. Again, so it sounds like this may be a common problem.
And Commissioner, that was in early voting too, correct?
It wasn't early voting. Again, that's even more concerning. So again, had he approached the DS200 tabulator, it would have been accepted in this case. But on election day, it would not have been accepted.
Correct.
Because, okay. So again, it's nice the machines work that way, but I do think that this is an opportunity where they're printing the wrong ballot for some reason. I think it's an opportunity for training to make sure that when you print out a ballot, you better really verify they've got the correct ballot, because it's easy to print the incorrect ballot and hand it to the voter by accident, whereas the express vote machines, that can't happen. You scan a receipt and it actually brings up your ballot by reading a barcode. That can't happen there. On the express vote, you scan a receipt that brings up your ballot.
Correct.
So it's unlikely to happen there. But when someone goes to a ballot on demand printer, they can in fact print the wrong ballot. So we need to work on processes in that area.
Agreed.
Okay. I got it right so far? Sounds right?
Yes.
I guess I would speculate out of those 25, I'll bet all 25 of those are the traditional ballots where you fill in the bubbles, and none of those are on express vote machines. I'm going to speculate. I'd like to have that confirmed.
Thank you. I know at least one was express vote that has that had a streak or a mark through miss it, like a scratch through the
But you
code.
can see why it happened in that case.
Mhm.
Okay. One more question that came up in my mind after you started explaining is, you said that some of these we're not going to count. You indicated that some of them were for a different precinct that you gave them a ballot for, and so you're not going to fully count that ballot. How are we able to identify when there's no identifying marks of that voter? How are you going to tell whether or not that they were the right precinct or the wrong precinct?
Thanks. So again, these are election day, so there are only specific precincts at the precinct ballots at the polling site. If the precinct ballot that is in the container for that polling site doesn't match a precinct ballot that should have been at that polling site, then we will know that it was not the correct ballot for the polling site.
You got that? I'm giving you a blank look because I still don't understand.
Right. On early voting, every voter can go to any poll site on early voting, and those tabulators will accept the ballot from anywhere in Sedgwick County. But on election day, a poll site only has about 10 precincts. That is, or maybe only 5 or 6 precincts that associate with that particular poll site. So if you print the wrong ballot out of the ballot on demand printer, and you try to put that into a DS200 tabulator, it won't accept it because it's not from one of those 5 or 6 precincts. It's from someplace else in the county. It says, I can't accept you because it's not one of the 5 or 6 I'm expecting. So that's why. So again, on election day, it's limited to a few precincts, whereas on early voting, it's limited to all precincts.
The ballot that they have in their hand that you gave them, which is not for that precinct, we can't identify the individuals, so how do you know what precinct that you're going to count different voters for?
She's talking statewide. You're talking the statewide.
You're only going
is
to take
what-
the statewide off all of
The
us.
recommendation would be for you to consider what you would authorize, and I would look at potentially the statewide races, a race in which each voter would have been qualified to vote for.
But there's judges, there are commissioners, there's a whole number of other people that aren't statewide, so none of those are going to get counted?
Out of the 25 of these, no, right? Is that what you're asking? We're
If you
talking
authorize,
25 votes.
if you authorize me to count those partially, that would be a suggestion of how to do it.
Well,
Again,
I would
these,
think you'd want to count the county votes because they're countywide.
Countywide and statewide would have to be counted because they're the same on every ballot in Sedgwick County.
sure,
Anything that's less than a countywide or statewide ballot question would have to be, again, if it's different from different places in the county, it would have to not be counted because, and the guy that called me, he had to vote for one of the other commissioners. He had the wrong commission race, which is why he called me. And he was upset. So then, in that particular case, had that one not been cured or fixed, we would not count that commission race because he was in the wrong. He had the wrong ballot for what he was supposed to get. So anything that's statewide or countywide, it means judges, Secretary of State, Treasurer, AG, Governor, all those should count because every ballot has the same on every one of those races. For Republicans and Democrats.
that is how I looked at it. Again, that's why I brought it to the canvas. It's problematic when I looked at it. It's not a decision for me to make. It's a decision for you to make, and that's why it's before you to make.
Okay, so I think that the consensus after listening to everything thank you. It appears that the consensus is to count statewide and countywide elections for Democrat, Republicans, and there could be some independents in here too because this ballot was open for independents.
Right. Evaluating both of them, it would be.
Yeah. So I would count all Republican, Democrat, and independent voters, but not any races that were below those levels for state or countywide. I'd make that motion.
I'd make a second with an explanation.
Second with the next place.
I will second that motion, but my explanation of vote is this. These are not provisional voters. These are voters that have a right to vote. And on those races, they have a right to vote on those races. And their votes need to count. So I think on that regard, I would want to count this, but I do think we have an opportunity to tighten this issue up significantly. So I will second the motion.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. We went through one.
Thank you, sorry about that. Okay, so the next category is advance, where an individual was mailed a ballot, and then they appeared and voted at the polls. They appeared and voted provisionally and did not return their advance mail ballot. So we mailed a ballot, the individual went to the polls, they voted, we came provisionally, we checked, and we never returned or counted a mail ballot for them. So that's one ballot cast for the individual, was 576 of those.
Okay. And all 576 of those should count because they only voted one time, even though they had an advance ballot sent to them. Okay. Move to vote to count the 576 advance ballots. Second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Now, next, a whole lot of people went to the wrong polling place.
A whole lot of people went to the wrong polling place. You're correct. 2,468 went to the wrong polling place. They were given the opportunity to go to their assigned polling place, but chose to stay and vote provisionally.
Okay. In these cases, we're only going to count those that were statewide or countywide, correct? And the amendment.
So those would be
Yep,
only, those would be only the contest for which the voter was eligible to vote. They would be partial counts. That's correct.
I move that we count the ballots that were statewide and countywide for each of these 2,468 ballots. Second.
Yeah, I'll second that. I'm curious, are they right in front of us right now? Yes, right here. I don't know if I would take a moment just to kind of examine those a little bit and see if we can glean anything else from this discussion. That's an awful lot of ballots, and I feel like I have a duty to at least put my hands on them a little bit and see what's going on there. So, give me just a moment, please.
Typically, the Board of County canvassers would not touch the provisionals. Is that correct, Mr.
That's
Counselor?
generally been practiced.
We don't touch provisions.
Typically not the provisionals. Typically what you're going to put your hands on are the signature issues.
It's not prohibited. Generally, it's not been prohibited to touch the provisional ballots, but considering they're being voted on as to whether they do count provisionally, we've never handed those out for in the past.
Can I ask another question? So, in each one of these, there has to be a reason for the provisional is listed there. There was a sentence from the poll worker, and they said it should state on the front of that provisional explainer exactly what the reason for the provisional was. And so in each one of these cases, it states that they voted, they were in the wrong poll site.
Correct.
And there's no other issues with those? I mean, is there anything else that would be a double problem? If that's the only problem with this particular ballots?
Let me ask. Are each one of these identified on the front for the reason that they were at the wrong place or states that they were at the wrong location? Is there something that identifies on the front of these the reason that we're going to count a portion of this?
On the back of them, but they have a voter registration on the front of them with all of their personal information.
Okay. I don't see any reason you couldn't pass around one of those for the back so that we can see what the intention is.
showing this one that we looked at it?
You're just saying that this is the correct issue.
In this particular one, they look like in this particular ballot, it looks to me like they may have moved, and they had to update their address. Is that considered wrong poll place? That's maybe a different topic, is it not?
It's
There
in this
are-
category.
Yeah, there are.
The next one we're going to cover is moved, and this one
Yeah, that one
indicates
says-
moved.
It says,
So
it says address, correct?
We're making a decision based on the wrong reason. The next one we're going to cover says moved. This one indicates that they moved.
So I guess what would be the difference between this section and the next section, I think is their question they're trying to ask.
Okay, so, wrong polling place, okay, so moved would be, have moved since they last registered and voted in the correct polling place.
But look at that ballot.
Yeah. Is that one?
That one's wrong polling place.
I have a technical question as well.
Okay, and on this one, they were given the wrong ballot style for their precinct. They went to the wrong polling place based on their address.
Why do we have a box that says moved, and then we have a reason for moved?
So moved is went to the right polling place based on their new address. This is went to the wrong polling place based on their address.
Further questions?
Yeah. I know this is a little technical, but if they did move and they're in the right poll place for their new address, do they get to vote on the things on their ballot for the new address? They should count, or is it? That's what we're saying. I think there's two very similar things here. One is they're in their new poll place for their new address, but they have not updated the registration. So it fixes that. That's the move, right? And the other one is where someone's in the wrong poll place, maybe they're at the old address, and they should not be able to count on that entire ballot because they're in the wrong poll place and they're using the old address.
Correct.
In either case, they fill out a registration form to fix that problem, but they're not allowed to vote on the whole ballot. They're only allowed to vote on things that are common to both races, or both places, if you will.
Correct, those would be partial counts, yes.
So,
But they would have been allowed to vote at the new polling place had they gone to the new polling place and they chose not to.
no, so what she said, they moved, they're in their correct polling place, and they're going to vote on their correct ballot for their new address, but they have not updated the registration yet.
No, I'm talking about the category that's marked wrong polling place.
Okay.
They were offered the opportunity to go to the correct polling place and did not do so.
Right, so, okay.
So
And had they gone to the correct polling place, they could have voted on the correct ballot.
Right.
They should have, so it had vote provisionally. Okay, all right. Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Okay, so on this item, 2,468 went to the wrong polling place. Move that we accept those that are statewide or countywide and deny anything that is not one of those two and valued them both, which is statewide.
So they would be able to
Second.
I'd second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Precinct commissioner.
Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Hold on, just
Sorry.
1 second. So if they went to, the provisional ballot would allow them to vote on every race, not just the statewide races. I mean, if they went to the wrong polling place and they were given a provisional ballot for their specific race, they would be able to vote on all races. Your motion was to count statewide
Statewide and local.
and local.
Basically, okay, let's say that someone's in a commission district and they move within that same district, their vote would still count on the commission district, but it wouldn't count as, to say, a precinct committeeman or whatever if they moved out of the precinct. So all the races from statewide on down count until you get to the point where they can't count anymore because they don't live in that voting unit.
So,
Right, but
the right way to say it is common, common.
For which they were eligible.
So I don't know if we have to discuss it, I just want to do a partial count based on.
Just to clarify, Commissioner, they were not always given the correct ballot for their polling place. If they were in the wrong polling place, we don't have ballot on demand printers at every place, so they did not necessarily always have available the correct ballot for
correct
the polling
races
place,
for them.
which is what would prompt the partial count. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that is helpful. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to have to modify my motion. Okay. It is possible then, on the local votes, the countywide votes, that they ended up voting someplace where the different commissioner possibly would be on their ballot. So the only ones that we can count are the statewide. Is that not correct?
We have information regarding what ballot they should have received and what ballot they did receive and what contests are on each. And what we do is we have the information on what they should have received and what they did receive, and we go and anything that matches between the two is what is counted on the partial count. So in the event that they went to a county commission district within their county commission and received a ballot with that county commissioner that they would have been eligible to vote for in their own polling place, and it's maybe a polling place down the street that's in the same district that has the same ballot, and those would typically be counted. That's
But my
typically
original motion is not the correct motion, because I allowed everything that was local. Okay, my original motion is still valid though, because I was going to allow all of the countywide to count, and they may or may not count. So I guess to amend the motion, I move that we accept all at the state level and those that you can identify at below that level that would have been on their ballot had they voted with the correct ballot.
May I make a suggestion?
Yes.
The motion would be to count any races for which the voter.
the suggestion would be to make a motion to count any races for which the voter was eligible.
Okay. Move to accept 2,468 ballots for those that they were eligible.
I would second that, but I would like to know, this is a very manual process. What's our control to make sure this is done correctly? How do we know that this is interpreted correctly and we're doing it? Every one of these takes personal attention. Are there teams of people looking at this that we know that it's being done, so there's no, I don't want someone to make a mistake on this. How do we know that's being done correctly?
Thank you for the question. There are a lot of them, and we do have teams. We have a team of people who will mark, and that's a bipartisan team, and then it will move to a team of people who will proof. So they mark the tally sheet at one, they agree together, they look at the ballot, they agree what the selection was, they find out if it was on the tally sheet. If it's on the tally sheet, they mark it, they look at it again, and then it moves over to another group, a bipartisan team, to proof, and they check those results, make sure that it was marked the way it's on the ballot.
So two bipartisan teams.
Correct.
And every one of these ballots goes through that process.
Which is why we need a lot of time.
Second.
Okay, any questions? Okay, I don't see any further questions. We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Both same sign. Motion passes. Thank you. Next, we have 887 ballots that people moved. You want to explain?
These individuals moved and did not update their registration. They went to the correct polling place and should have received the correct ballot. So we would recommend that those be counted and their registration will be updated so they shouldn't have the problem in the future.
We should be full count.
Okay, any questions whatsoever? This should be a full count of all 887. Any questions? Seeing none, move to approve all 887 ballots. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, pose same sign. Motion carries unanimously. Next up is 192 people that changed their names.
They changed their names and did not update their registration. So potentially, for whatever reason, whether it's a marriage or something, their ID has a new name, but they did not update their registration. Conveniently, when they got their new driver's license that they could do online, they filled out a provisional, and this will update their registration.
Okay, any questions on that? Because all 192 should count. Seeing nothing, move to approve to accept all 192 that names changed. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, the next one says clerical error, and there's 195. You'll have to explain.
I figured I would, sir. So this is a good example of this is a voter who is in the poll book, but the board worker, for whatever reason, can't find them in the poll book. Typically, the driver's license will scan and it will come off that if someone is not using that ID or it doesn't scan or someone gets another ID. I know we had some instances where the election worker had the individual say their name and spell it to them and still typed it in wrong. For whatever reason, couldn't find it. Asked them to fill out and vote provisionally as not in the poll book. When we got the provisionals back, we looked them up, we found them in the poll book, and those should count.
Okay, and the provisional ballot that you gave them was for the correct precinct.
Correct.
Okay, so all 195 of these should count. Any questions?
So, if they went to a different poll site and they checked in somewhere else, and you didn't find it later on, and they did cast a provisional ballot someplace else, this would be cross-checked. There's no way they could have voted. In other words, they didn't go to two poll sites and check in on one and then go to the provisional in the second one. That would be caught in this case.
Correct.
That sounds crazy, I suppose, but I wanted to just double check it. So every one of these is the same type of error. Every one of these is exactly, they couldn't find them in the poll pad.
I would have to,
I'd have to look to see if every single one of them was that exact error. But so what happens with a provisional like this is that when we get it back in our office, every single one of these is researched. So we'll take it, we'll look it up, we'll find out the information, see what happened, check to see if the voter voted already, check to see if they requested advance ballot. And so those are the things that we go through, which is how we would know that they hadn't voted anywhere else. Is that helpful?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so all 195 should be counted because it's just a clerical error. Any questions? Being none, move to approve all 195 and count those ballots.
second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Being none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. The next one is ID Cure 23.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Earlier we talked about ID cured on some of the mail-in ballots. These are ID cured on provisional ballots. These would be individuals who appeared at the poll site that did not have ID on them at the time. So they were asked to vote provisionally. They then cured that by providing us with the ID.
Okay, since they provided a valid ID, all 23 of these should count. Any questions, Commissioner Howell?
When they provide an ID, do they do that electronically or do they have to come in?
They can come in or they can mail it.
So if they mailed it, how do you know that that was them? I mean, you have to be photo ID. If they mailed it in, how do you know that they're the ones that, there's no photo identification check mark.
To my understanding, the requirement is they either appear in person with their ID or they mail in a copy of that.
Is that the case? He's looking for ID.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch it. What was the question?
If someone provides their photo ID, they do it electronically, they're not actually coming into the office. So again, they didn't present it at the poll site, and they presented it electronically later on. But you're not being presented photo ID physically. You're simply getting it electronically. There's no actual verification that the person in the picture is the person that's voting.
There is verification of the signature. So you're comparing the signature of who checked in on the poll book with the signature on the ID.
But our state does require, I understand, for mail ballots you're correct, but for poll site voting it does require a photo ID.
But this is the corrective action to take care of the fact they didn't have an ID and voted provisionally. Or they didn't have their ID with them that they provided.
Okay. Question then, when they vote provisionally, are they actually doing signature verification on the provisional envelope? Are they doing a signature verification on the provisional envelope? That's the question.
Yes.
They are.
Yes.
Okay, I move that we count 23 that IDs were cured. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have 77. The party was cured. What are the three asterisks under that mean?
Means that we'll move on to a different type of category after that.
Okay, so the 77 that are party cured, those would be individuals who requested a ballot for a party with which they were not affiliated. They were unaffiliated voters and requested a ballot and did not affiliate at the time that they requested the ballot. And so they were sent a party registration card along with the provisional ballot. They returned that party registration card affiliating. So they would then be affiliated with the party and qualified for the ballot. Is that helpful?
Okay, so at the time they came to the polling site, they were unaffiliated.
These would be male.
Well, these are married. All right. So these, because they did return the correct affiliation, then we can count that by the party that they affiliated to.
Correct.
Okay. Any questions on that? Okay, move to accept the 77 ballots that were cured by adding the correct party.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have 66 on parties. You going to have to explain that?
These are voters who are affiliated with a party and requested a ballot for another party, voted on the ballot for a different party.
Well, in this case, I don't think we can accept them because they're voting on the wrong ballot.
Value of those men.
The value of the vote, that's about the only one that we can count.
What is your recommendation? Are you saying not to count these? Is that where this line is drawn, that these are the ones we're not going to accept?
Commissioner, I have no recommendation on this category. I would defer to the county councilor on this category.
So my question is, they came in with a ballot, with a registered party, and wanted to vote on a different party. And they didn't change their registration because they couldn't, because the time was up. Okay.
When you go in and you vote for a different party or you try to vote for a different party on a provisional ballot, that by law does not count.
Okay.
The one thing that I will say is that this was two different elections being conducted at the same time. You had a special election, which is the constitutional amendment, and then you had a primary election. Ordinarily, if you were going to have a constitutional question that was at some time different from November, it would be on a separate ballot. This was not on a separate ballot. So I have no recommendation on this one way or the other. The Board of County Canvassers can do as it wishes on this. I just wanted to explain the legal significance of the different elections.
So if someone tried to vote for the other party for any other race, I can see why those would be not allowed by law. But the value of the both amendment is on every ballot, regardless of party. I would see it. I think it's reasonable for us to count the value of the both amendment results only on those 66 ballots.
No, I concur with Commissioner Howell. It's that we should count the ones that were for the constitutional amendment, but nothing else on that ballot. So I'll make a motion that we count 77 of the value of the vote and nothing else on the ballot. Any discussion?
66.
I'm sorry, 66. Beg your pardon, 66.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
What is the total number? 77,066 or just 77? Is it less than 100?
It's 66 total ballots.
Other counties didn't do that.
Thank
Butler threw those all out.
Okay. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have 408 not registered in Kansas, and I don't see any way to count those.
Correct, those voters were not registered in the poll book in the right state of Kansas, and the recommendation would be to not count.
Move, we do not count 408 ballots for people that were not registered in the state of Kansas. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have 324 that are not registered in the county. And again, I see no reason to count those.
If those voters are not registered in Sedgwick County, we're not able to count those.
Move that we do not count 324 ballots for people that were not registered in Sedgwick County.
Why not the amendment?
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay.
I can hear people talking behind us. Let's just address that. So what about the amendment? Sedgwick County cannot conduct elections for residents outside Sedgwick County, except for very rare instances, like if there's a city of Sedgwick or city of Mulvane, for example, sits on the county line. You make an agreement with those other cities, but otherwise, we don't conduct. I don't know where these people are in Kansas. We don't know what they may have done in those other counties. I don't see there's any way to resolve this by accepting the value of the both amendment for those people who are not living in Sedgwick County, not registered in Sedgwick County. We don't even have to register someplace else, do we? Are they registered somewhere else in Kansas?
Potentially, but as a matter of technicality, we have no way to post voter credit for anyone outside of our county.
I think we need to move forward.
Okay. Move that we do not count 324 ballots for people that were not registered in Sedgwick County.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have 11 advance ballots with a question.
On these advance, the individual voted by mail and provisionally in person. The provisional is the one that was recommended to count. So you saw those earlier in the recommended to count. So then we would ask to not count these 11 ballots since the provisionals would have been counted.
Okay, any questions on these 11? Move not to count these 11 advance ballots.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have 2 that say mail.
So this is the other side of the same coin. You had people who voted by mail and then voted provisionally by mail. And the provisional that they voted by mail was recommended to count. than the original. They voted by mail, which sometimes came in at least one case, came in after is recommended not to count.
Any questions?
In this case, is there any type of referring this to the Attorney General or District Attorney for investigation for voting twice?
We have not done so.
I think we should.
Well, if they attempted to vote twice knowingly, and it appears they attempted to vote twice knowingly, we probably should have reported.
Do you need a motion for that? You can make a motion for that?
I'll make a motion that we report these two individuals to the Attorney General.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously.
Any disposition to ballots still?
And now we have two ballots that we are not going to count. I make a motion we do not count these two ballots.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have 13 that did not have an ID, and they did not cure that. So I don't think we'll count it, but we'll find out.
It would be the recommendation not to count those that did not present ID.
Very good. Kansas requires valid ID. They do have an opportunity to cure that. 13 people did not count those 13 ballots.
Second.
I heard a second over here, but I just want to ask, so can you please describe the attempt that was made to contact these voters? And
Sure. On these, if it was a mail, they are, so these were actually polling this ID not cured. So they would have been called and potentially sent a letter depending on how late we're going through them. So there's a lot here. And it takes our staff a long time to go through them. If we were finishing it up yesterday, then there would not have been time to send a letter, but we would call the individual.
they had until 1 o'clock today?
Correct.
Thank you. Any other questions on ID not cured? We have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have one clerical error, a voter error. You want to explain?
So this is kind of an odd one. An individual requested a ballot for a reason. Potentially they were not registered, or for whatever reason it was a provisional ballot that was sent to them. They're required to fill out the registration form and send it back with the ballot inside. The person that we sent it to is not the person who filled out the registration form. So someone else entirely at that same address filled out that registration form. They did not request the ballot, and we would recommend it not be counted.
Any questions on this?
I've read some election law recently, and it sounds like this might be another one that's to be referred to the Attorney General. Because it is if you fraudulently fill out the registration on behalf of another voter without, I mean, there's maybe certain ways to do that, but if you do that fraudulently, that is a felony, potentially. So I have to refer this one to the Attorney General as well.
Can I ask a question? What if it's a caregiver of somebody who is unable to write? I mean, what if they're incapable of filling it out? I think sometimes we have signatures that are very hard to read, but they still tried to sign it. But for whatever condition maybe they have, they weren't able to fill it out.
Sure. In this case, they actually filled out a completely different person's name. So it's if I sent it to you, but Mr. Stamper filled it out and sent it back with his name. To your point, you could do that. We do not know for sure that there's a ballot inside. There is something inside, but unless we open it, we won't know if there's a ballot inside. Is that helpful? Does that make sense?
I just think you need to find out. So I guess my concern is that someone's represented another voter without, we don't know for sure that they did that legally. So I guess I just want to take it to the next step and have it investigated. So.
Okay, I agree that there's a question here, and we're not the appropriate people to investigate that. The Secretary, the Attorney General is. So I move, first of all, that we send this to the Attorney General for a decision. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Second of all, I move that we do not count this one ballot with the clerical error. Do I have a second? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, next we have 33 ballots that were returned improperly.
These are things like they were returned in the wrong envelope. They need to be returned in the specific envelope in order for them to count because they have an affidavit. This also includes 2 ballots that were returned in ballot drop boxes without envelopes. So the person had just taken the ballot, folded it up, and put it in the drop box. And so we can't take those either. In order to accept a ballot through a drop box, it has to be in the proper envelope. So there's 33 of these total that were returned improperly.
Thank you. Any questions for Angela?
Just want to make sure that, for example, if someone put their entire security return envelope inside of a FedEx mailer, for example, would we not want to at least find out what's inside that to find out if the security envelope is inside? Is there something that's large enough that the security envelope would be inside?
So if someone sent us a FedEx, we wouldn't know it was a ballot, so we would open it. And then if the ballot envelope was in there, then it would be counted.
Okay. I move that we do not count the 33 that were returned improperly.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have 86 that were received late.
These were mailed late or received without the proper postmark. The postmark had to be by the 2nd, and it had to be in our office by the 5th.
Okay, and we had a little issue earlier. These we checked with the post office to make sure there was nothing available. So all of these were received late, and there was no possible way that we would have ever received them in our election office on time because we checked. Correct?
Yes, we've set up with the post office to have a late night drop on the Friday that is the last day. And so typically they will come to our office at the last delivery about 11:15, 11:30. In this case, we do actually have 2 that had no postmark at all. We inquired with the post office about that, and they didn't have any information on that. They just had no postmark at all.
But they were still received after the deadline? Were they received before the deadline? So we could...
yeah, that one, the 2, I guess I've got a question on because they came through the Postal Service, correct?
Yes.
And they were arrived before the deadline, correct?
Yes.
Well, I don't know why we wouldn't count those 2. Did anybody have anything?
If you say deadline, you mean Tuesday at 7 o'clock or Friday at midnight?
Yeah, the Friday night deadline.
So they could have been mailed on Thursday and received on Friday before midnight. We don't know if they were mailed on Friday.
I'm sorry.
It would show up between those 2 days.
As long as it was received before Tuesday at 7.
They were not received before Tuesday at 7. They were received after Tuesday at 7, but before the end of the day on the 5th. They were in that window.
So we wouldn't have known if they were actually mailed on Wednesday.
We do not know.
Okay, well, then I changed them.
And one other question.
So, but they were at the post office, though. Okay, so...
But they could have been at the post office after Tuesday.
It has to be mailed by the close of the polls on Tuesday.
Sure.
So even if it shows up before the time on Friday, it still should not be counted if you can't ascertain that it was sent out on time.
Any initial leads or anything?
But that would have been an error of the post office not to have the postmark.
We would expect all ballots to have some, or all envelopes that come through the postal service to have some type of mark on them. These did not, and when we inquired, the answer was something about there are some machines that sort. I'm not entirely sure the reason they didn't get a mark on them, but they did not get a mark on them.
That brings up a couple of good questions. So if someone mails their mail ballot without postage, does it still come in with a postmark? It does. Also, this is a bit of a gray area, I understand, but those ballots you received were postmarked on August the 2nd. I should say any ballot you received that was mailed on August the 2nd. I understand you do not have timestamp, they only have a date stamp. And it's our opinion that they should or should not be counted if they don't have a timestamp. They're mailed on the 2nd. They don't know what time of day they were mailed. What's our position on that? I think some counties do this differently. We need to clean this up in state law, but I just want to make sure we are clear what we're doing.
Oh, I see that.
We have no way to determine what time any ballot that was postmarked on the 2nd was mailed.
So, but are we counting them? Is my question. Have you processed those? You've accepted them and count. You've already processed those ballots.
We're bringing them. So anything that was postmarked on the 2nd, yes,
So they were already counted.
yes.
I do think we need a state
There's
law.
no way to clarify that.
State law should be clear because it doesn't really address this in state law.
But we have to take that up with them. We can't decide that here.
That's fine, but I just want to make a point. It's a problem. Thank you. Yeah, I need additional stuff. Thank you.
Okay, why don't we take them one at a time? We'll take these two ballots first, and it is unanimous that we vote no, so I move that we vote no. We do not count the two that we have no postmark on.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes unanimously. Now we have 84 ballots that were received late. Move that we do not count those 84 ballots.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. The next one, we have 15 that we received provisional ballots with no signature.
Correct. These would be just the provisional ballots where the individual did not sign or were required to sign. So we would recommend not to count these.
But these were done at the polling place, correct? Or they were provisional mail to them? How did they
It
get
could
it?
have been either.
Yeah, it could have been either provisional at the polling place or provisional mail.
But if they're at the polling place, then the polling place will identify that and have to sign it.
Yes, but not everyone does what is requested of them.
Okay. All right, any questions on these 15 ballots? Seeing none, everyone has to sign those. So move that we do not count the 15 ballots, the provisional ballots that had no signature.
Second.
With motion
Second.
and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Both same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have 57 that came by mail with no signatures.
State law is clear on outreach on these. We actually mail a letter and attempt to contact them 3 times. We had a bunch that had problems that came back, which was great, but we had a handful that didn't ever get the signature secured. We would recommend those not to be counted.
Question for answer on that? Seeing none, I move that we do not count 57 ballots were received by mail with no signature.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
So once again, did they have to come in and provide that signature? How do you get a signature electronically, I guess? What's the process?
And we give them options. We will send them a letter that is a copy of the ballot envelope with where they need to sign. They can sign that and send it back, which allows us to do the required signature matching. They can come in and sign in person, or they can email it back to us, just as long as it's signed where it's supposed to be signed, and we can do that signature. It needs to be in a place where that affidavit is on that mail ballot, so it has to be in that pretty specific place.
Very good. Any other questions on those 57 ballots? Seeing none, move that we do not accept 57 ballots or received with no signature.
Motion.
We have a
Second.
motion and a second. Any discussion? Question?
Can you please tell us how many of those actually were cured and provided a signature? How many were there total before we started trying to fix them?
Wrote that number down.
Commissioner, I have to get that number for you. I wrote it down, but I
Okay.
don't see it in front of me. It was quite a bit. We had quite a lot.
Okay, any other questions on that one? Seeing none, move that we wrote that motion.
Yeah, motion on the table.
Motion second.
Yeah, motion on the table.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we have 11 that were signed by some person other than the voter.
Typically, we see these in pairs where people have swapped, but we have actually seen them not in pairs as well, where maybe someone had signed theirs and then had signed someone else's. But for whatever reason, the person who signed it is not the voter, and it's clearly indicated because they wrote their own name on the address return and then signed their own name, which is not the voter's name. We recommend those not count.
Questions on this? Seeing none, move that we do not count the 11 ballots that were signed by a person other than the voter.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Next, we do have 15 that it looks like we're going to look at. We have 15 ballots with signatures to be reviewed by the Board of Canvassers. So we're going to pass those around. We're going to have to identify on the outside of the envelope, as we normally do, whether to count that or not count it. We'll do that individually. Each canvasser review it, put your initials on it, and whether you accept that ballot or do not accept that ballot.
I'm sorry, I grabbed my pen.
You start having everything in, pass it across, of course, all of them will end up in my place next time.
I don't think we should go both ways. I think we should start on that side. So
You started that.
So you'll see on the envelope where the voter, or where someone had signed in place of the voter, and then you will see comparison signatures on the back. Those are signatures that we're allowed to clip from either previous voter registrations or previous ballot
Okay,
images.
so, but we're marking on this envelope.
Typically, where do you mark on the front of the envelope?
We actually, we do it on the back of the tally first. And if there's 3 or more commissioners, then we initial the front. We typically will independently vote, and if there's 3 commissioners that believe it's not to be counted, then we will initial the front of the envelope to not count that. As a packet.
Got it. quite a bit, 200.
I had so many of those cough drops when I had bronchitis. I can't even look at them anymore. I don't want them.
What kind do you buy?
Yeah, the cheese balls, the cheese ones. I don't move to sugar-free though because I realize. But, how are you?
Wonderful job. It's like, this is gonna be, you're gonna get a lot of steps in.
Working on it.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, so what you're looking at here are, these are signatures that we have, these are signatures that have come in that would have been like on a voter registration, or in this case, these are both previous advance mail ballots.
We're gonna let you do the tally.
I'm sorry, I was told there would be no now.
I think you can handle that. Why don't you just make a pile? Yes, isn't it? So if someone has a documented disability, or if someone has, in their, how do we take that into consideration?
So the question is if someone has a documented disability, and so what I think you're asking is signatures do change over time. Someone may have a stroke or something like that. When we see something like this that doesn't match, what we will do is reach out to the individual and say, it looks like your signature may have changed, please update it. There's an official card on which they can do that. And in these cases, we've had no signatures updated, so we were not able to validate the signature that way.
Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry.
This person changed the name.
That appears to be the case, but we did not receive any name change.
So
We just signed it differently.
Well, okay, now I'm confused.
yeah, it actually looked like me. He filled it out this way, signed it that way, sent this person.
Yes.
That's the signatures we have for that person.
Well, you can't.
At the lower right.
Yeah, there's a form. The first one you can find the system to vote.
Yes.
You have to go through and do all the.
Okay.
That's very bad, just make the decision. Yes, so we're looking at there, someone who's there.
That was taken out.
I'm sure if I got that right. On the one that's the seal there.
Pop it out. Yeah.
Okay, we can get you chair if you do. Okay.
I don't want to have a camera. My is going to be on camera. And I just don't like these shots of these.
What about a bag? All right.
So what, here's, on that one, here's that power of attorney sign for that.
One. One to your left.
would have received a letter.
Who would have received the voter would have received the letter. To that same address with that line.
Yeah.
But it's read.
These, if they, in either case, do these people get a request for registration update, to signatures update?
So each individual who signature didn't match, we would have requested, we said it appears that you've changed your signature. We would have sent them information asking them to update their signature. You will see one coming through that has a POA on it, that's a power of attorney. It looks like a power of attorney signed. The power of attorney did not sign in the correct spot. It has to be in number 3, and they would have received a letter that says the voter needs to either sign here, or if someone signs on behalf that they've assisted, they need to sign in that space. So there's a specific affidavit for specific reasons.
So one of these apparently is a name, one of these is apparently a name change, and they need to update their registration. So we know probably, I'm gonna guess it's gonna be a yes. We need to get them to update their registration.
Correct.
We only had one yes so far.
I'd like to talk about this one. People can't initial, it says signature, needs to be signature. This one,
Let me give this to you, sorry.
so anybody that's listening in, I just want to say, if you're supposed to sign your ballot, you need to sign your ballot. If you just do the squiggle, it looks like a maybe one letter, it's not going to be considered a signature. I just don't see there's any way. I don't think that's a match, but just my opinion. But you need to make sure they sign their names, you know, it's reasonably, whatever their legal name is, sign it. May not count. Did I both
You have to sign that?
Commissioner, I would say that we have the same opinion. If we cannot match it, then that's why it comes to you.
file there looked exactly the same. And it looks like this was done electronically, but when we looked at that, it's not a fair match. So yeah, that's the same. So yeah, so this is Jordan for here, and then there's the dedicated. That's the last thing. You see what I'm saying?
I see
Yeah.
what you're saying.
Someone had to point that out to me as well.
I'm trying to look at that at the second hand.
Me too, yeah. Someone had to point that out to me as well.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
So now this person.
So I think the no's go together, the initial and front, that's what we do that one. Never mind.
I mean, yeah, that doesn't. But it's assisting, so because this one isn't checked. Why would I not use that? Shouldn't we be verifying that? Okay, so if they would have checked that one, then we would have been verifying this one only, and not that one. So for this one in particular, because they did check number 2, if they would have checked this box right here, we would be verifying this signature instead of this one?
Here, if the person is signing.
Okay.
A lot of affidavits on the.
Yeah, okay. That's why we ask the questions. Okay. Also set, yes.
Jim Wall.
So why is this taped to this? Why is there a copy made of this? Okay. Have you already explained it?
So this would be one where we did not get the signature and we sent it out. They signed and sent it back. And then they came in and signed it, but the signature still did not match.
Angela, we have 14 ballots that we are not going to accept because the signatures did not match. So I move that we do not count 14 ballots that were all voted unanimously as a no. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes. We had one ballot that was a split decision. We had 3 that voted yes, 2 that voted no. I move that we count that one ballot that was a 3-2 vote.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Okay,
That concludes all of the different decisions we have to make today. I move that we ask Angela Cadillo and her staff to open and count the accepted ballots. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. Next, I'd like to move that we recess until 8:15, Monday, August 15th, 2022, to allow the election board to tally the approved provisional ballots and to produce final result reports for certification. We have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. The meeting will reconvene Monday morning, 8:15. Are we going to meet here or downstairs?
No, we'll be
Back in this room?
downstairs.
Back downstairs.
Downstairs.
Okay. We'll meet on Monday morning at 8:15 downstairs. And at that time, we will vote for approval. Anything else needs to come before the Board of Canvassers today? Commissioner Howell?
We don't have a chance to talk, we're basically already motioned to recess, but I wanted to talk about the election audit certification. And I know there's at least some questions regarding the constitutional amendment, the audit for that, whether it's required or not, and what the process is. I think there's some controversy out there. I'd like to at least address that. I can address it Monday, but I do think there's people that are interested in that, those two things. And I would like to have a chance to at least talk about that publicly in a public open meeting. So I don't know when's the right time to do that, but
We can do it Monday because we'll reopen.
I will, I guess I'll just say it's my intent on Monday to talk about the election audit certification as well as the constitutional amendment audit process, whether it's required or not, and some details related to that. So I'll do that on Monday. Thank you.
Anything else?
We are in recess until Monday.